I don't think so.
Now we're recording.
Well, good morning, everyone, and
Good
welcome to
morning.
Thursday morning Bible study. And we are continuing our study of the Catechism, and the Ten Commandments as presented in the Catechism. So we've already done the first commandment: "I am the Lord thy God; thou shalt not have false gods before me." And commandment 2: "Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain." And now we are on commandment 3: "Remember thou to keep holy the Sabbath day." Before we go to the third commandment, does anybody have questions from the last couple of weeks on the first two commandments?
I couldn't even remember reading the first two. I had to go back and look at it.
All right. Well, then I'll let you go look at it on your leisure. And we will start with the third commandment. All right, who wants to read the actual commandment? Right up here, this part.
Oh.
I'll read it.
Oh.
Remember the Sabbath day, to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. In it you shall not do any work. The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath.
Okay, so the first two lines that Michael read there, they are from the Bible, I mean the Old Testament. That is part of the actual command that's given to Moses. The third line is a teaching of Jesus, that the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath, which is going to, in essence, justify the reinterpretation of the third commandment as we now do so as Christians. So the first thing is actually to stay with, the Sabbath as presented in the Old Testament as a commandment delivered to Moses. And there are actually two reasons given for the Sabbath in the Old Testament, depending on whether you're reading Exodus or Deuteronomy. So we're looking at some of that now. If I were just to ask you, why is the Sabbath holy? What reason would you give?
Because
growing up, it is a dedication to God. It is a day set aside to praise God, to make sure that we praise.
Okay, well, who sets it aside? Who tells us it's a holy day? Come on, that's not a hard question.
Hello, I think I lost.
I lost it and then came back in. Did you hear what I said?
You're muted, Father Rich.
We heard you.
You're muted, Father Rich.
Okay, so I'm back. Something happened here. We lost the internet, and it came right back on, though.
Yeah.
So let me put the screen back up. What I had, the last I had was
now I'm hearing an echo, Father Rich.
Yeah.
Well,
I'm just not a host anymore.
yeah, because you lost me. I'm not sure why you're getting an echo. Are you still getting an echo?
No.
Not right now, no.
All right. Okay. So let's go back. So the last I knew we were connected, I had said, who set aside the Sabbath to make it holy?
I already said God did.
Okay. Well, no, that's I had lost you by then.
Oh, it
Mhm.
says in the commandment, God says to keep it holy.
Okay. So God sets aside the day as a holy day and gives us the commandment to keep it holy, right?
Mhm.
He's not telling us to make it holy. He's telling us to keep it holy. So the Sabbath is holy because God made it holy.
Right.
There are two different reasons given why God is setting the Sabbath aside. So what are the two reasons, depending on whether you're reading Exodus or Deuteronomy?
Well, he isn't.
We're not slaves.
Okay, so one reason is remember that you were once slaves in Egypt, and I freed you, and therefore you are now to keep the Sabbath holy. Okay, so that's one reason. What's the other reason?
The other reason is to worship God.
No, that's not why God. What reason did God give?
Oh, to rest?
To rest.
Right.
So the other reason is the Lord created the heaven and the earth in 6 days, and on the seventh day he rested. Therefore, you should rest.
All right. Okay.
So those are two different reasons for the Sabbath, and they have implications for kind of what's behind the Sabbath. All right. So if we go with the first reason, that was it Garnett or Loretta who gave that one about we were once
Loretta.
What is the significance of that, as saying, okay, you were once slaves, and I freed you from Egypt, so now keep holy the Sabbath. What's the implication? What is the connection between being slaves who were freed and the Sabbath?
Well,
Free will?
yeah, I was going to say we have our freedom to make that choice.
There you go. Right. When we were slaves,
We had no choice.
we didn't have the choice as to whether we would observe the Sabbath or not, because the masters determined what we did and when we did it and how we did it. Okay. So one reason God gives for the Sabbath is a day to celebrate our freedom. Is it just our freedom because to be free, or is it a freedom for a certain reason?
Freedom to praise him,
Yeah, it's a
to
freedom.
acknowledge his existence.
Exactly. It's a freedom. Now we're free to worship and praise God. And that's the liberation that we're remembering. So one reason to set the Sabbath aside is that it's a time for us to celebrate the fact that God gave us the freedom to worship him. And now the question is, are we going to exercise that freedom, right? All right.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. That's one implication of that reason. If the reason is because God created the heaven and earth in six days and rested on the seventh, therefore you should rest on the seventh, what's the implication of that for the Sabbath?
You're no better than God.
We should do the
If,
same.
if it took him, if he rested on the seventh day, you should rest also.
Okay.
Exactly.
That reminds me of be ye holy as I am holy.
in the New Testament.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's also a day of rest. Okay. So one reason, the liberation reason, tells us it's a day to exercise our freedom to worship God, right? And it's also a day to rest from all the work we've done in the preceding 6 days, because that's what God did. And as Gretchen just say, be holy as I am holy. So
Isn't that so powerful though? That I mean, when you think about it, when you're looking at this story of creation, and God makes the heavens and the earth, and then he rested, and now he's inviting you to live like him. That is so powerful.
it is, and he's given you the ability to do that by setting you free from slavery. Okay. So keep them in the back of your mind. Those are going to be the two elements of the Sabbath. Rest, because rest is what God did, and we are called to be, no better than God. So if God needed to rest, we need to rest. And also freedom to worship. Okay, that God gave us the freedom so that we could rest and worship him on the Sabbath.
Right.
Okay, so far so good? Because those are going to be the two elements we're going to be playing with as we try to understand what, in fact, are our obligations on the Sabbath. All right, so anybody have any questions on that?
No.
You can see the parts that I have highlighted. So in paragraph 2169, the Sabbath recalls creation and therefore, work and rest. And then the Sabbath is also the Lord's Day as a memorial of liberation from bondage. And then you bring them together. God, at 2171, God entrusted the Sabbath to Israel to keep as a sign of the irrevocable covenant. The Sabbath is for the Lord, holy and set apart for the praise of God, for his work of creation and his saving actions on behalf of Israel. Okay. And then there's this little, kind of edge to it in paragraph 2172, that it's a day of respite and a day of protest against the servitude of work and the worship of money.
Yes.
So before the release of the Israelites from Egypt, so the commandments came after all that. All right.
They weren't given
Thank you.
they weren't given the commandment
until they right. Okay.
But
there wasn't
God
any
makes a
Sabbath
connection almost that he couldn't command you this if you were still in slavery, because then you wouldn't have the ability to satisfy the commandment.
Okay.
That's going to be an issue that you'll see later on, that if you can't satisfy the commandment, are you obligated to do so? Okay. All right. Any questions on that? Just kind of the nature of the Sabbath?
And I was going to say that businesses really don't help with that, and families. And I remember, in the 80s when the blue laws were passed in Maryland, and how many people had to, I guess the question is, when you have to go to work with your family and feed your family, does that override anything with this commandment?
Okay, well, we're going to get that comes in later. We're going
okay.
All right, that's why we're setting it up. Right now, it's important to understand from the Jewish perspective and from the Old Testament, what was the Sabbath, why was the Sabbath, and what was required on the Sabbath.
Okay.
Because as you know, Jesus gets into trouble because he does not observe the Sabbath in the way that the Jews of his time were understanding the Sabbath. Okay. All right.
Talking about the blue laws, I like she was saying, back when we were smaller, nothing was open on Sunday. So that really helped us to be more focused. Now you got so many things going on Sundays. You know, you can go to market, you can go to Walmart, you can go shop for clothes. I mean, it
Mhm.
kind of
So
pushes you away.
just to, we'll get to it, but just to pay the devil's advocate, it helped us. Who's us?
But I'm just talking about us as
What
a
helped
whole.
But
us
that's
as
important because it's one of the reasons the blue laws went away. It helped
Christian folk.
Christians
if you were
Yeah,
who were
Jewish.
observing this practice.
right.
If you were Jewish, your faith said you couldn't work on Saturday, so you couldn't work on Saturday, and then the law said you couldn't work on Sunday.
Mm,
right?
So Jews lost 2 days of work.
wow.
So it didn't help them. Okay, so you got to keep that in mind. It helped us. It helped Christians observe
Right.
their requirement, but it didn't help the Jews. It hurt them to say you can't work on Sunday because morally they were certainly allowed to work on Sunday. They weren't allowed to work on Saturday. Um, and so you got to always keep yourself reminding of that. Who did the law help? The law helped Christians. It did not help other folks who might be observing the Sabbath on another day.
Very interesting.
Question. Um, and this might be something we get to later, but the fact that we observe 2 weekend masses, does that have anything to do with that, to have these 2 masses available, because there's some people who have to work on Sunday. So there's a mass, they can fulfill their obligation to go to mass either on Saturday or Sunday. The other part of the question could be, which is the Sabbath, Saturday or Sunday?
But we're going to
Which
get
is
to that. That's next.
okay. Okay.
We're all so
But
excited.
actually, from a liturgical perspective, the reason for what we call the Vigil Mass, which is Saturday,
Mhm.
is a recapturing of how Jews and early Christians kept time. So the day starts at sunset the day before. So the so for Jews, right, if Saturday is the day of Sabbath, when did Saturday start?
At
At
Sunday.
sunset on Friday.
Friday at
Sunset
sunset.
on Friday.
Mhm.
So if Christians were going to move the Sabbath to Sunday, when did Sunday start?
At sundown on
Down on
Saturday.
At
Saturday.
sundown on Saturday. So that's how you get the vigil mass.
Okay.
And so rather than worry about when does the sun set and when our masses allow, the church just made a decree in essence that as a practical matter, the sun sets at 4 o'clock on Saturday. And as a result, after 4 o'clock on Saturday, you can begin to observe the Sabbath, the Lord's Day. So that's how we get the vigil mass. It's not so that Saturday people who work on Sunday can go to mass on Saturday. As a practical matter, it's nice because that's what happens. But that's not what
It
drove it.
wasn't its intent.
Okay. So it was it's an attempt to recapture the early days of when does a day begin and when does the day end. The interesting thing is we did not then say that the Sabbath ended at sunset on Sunday. So we kind of extended it so that you actually get more than 24 hours to observe the Sabbath because you get to observe it all the way up to 12 o'clock midnight on Sunday. Whereas if you were strictly following the Jewish day, it would go from 4 o'clock on Saturday to 4 o'clock on Sunday. And you wouldn't be allowed to celebrate Sunday Mass after 4 o'clock because it would now be Monday. So anyway, but that's how you got that. But but this is all part of the first part is just to understand basically what the Sabbath was to the Jews. And how the last thing here, with compassion, Christ declares the Sabbath for doing good rather than harm. This is, if you remember, as Jesus was healing on the Sabbath and doing good on the Sabbath, he was kind of already reinterpreting what the obligations of the Sabbath really were. Okay, so it didn't ban all work, right? Because if you were going to do good work, you could still do that on the Sabbath. Whereas, the Jewish understanding in Jesus' time was you couldn't do any work on the Sabbath, even for good, unless it was an emergency.
Okay.
Okay, in danger of death. So if the examples were given, if your mule or a person fell into a ditch on the Sabbath, you were able to pull him out because the mule was your livelihood, and the person, of course, was his life. So you could do those things on a Sabbath, but only because it was an emergency situation.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why a doctor, in essence, would have to close his office, so to speak, for the Sabbath. But if someone were dying on the Sabbath, the doctor could go and handle that situation. But if you had a cold on the Sabbath, you couldn't go to the doctor on the Sabbath. You had to wait till the next day. Okay? So far, so good?
Yeah.
All right,
Yep.
now the question
I have a
becomes,
question.
go ahead.
But and when Jesus came along, he was healing on the Sabbath. Didn't the Jews get upset because he was healing on the Sabbath?
Yeah, that's what I'm just saying. He's reinterpreting how they understood the Sabbath.
Because to me it sounded like, and I've seen it in movies, I think it sounded like if that man fell in the ditch, they couldn't pull him out of the ditch, or somebody died or got really sick, they would have to let them die
No,
before they do anything.
that was not the Jewish understanding of the Sabbath. And there are exchanges that Jesus has with the Pharisees that says, look, if this guy was basically in danger of death, I'd be able to heal him on the Sabbath. But why should he have to wait one more day? He's been under this burden for 18 years. Why
Right.
should he have to wait one more day? Because remember, that was the claim. 6 days he could have come for healing. Let him come on the other 6 days because he wasn't in danger of death. This is the man, I think, with the withered hand.
Oh, okay.
He wasn't in danger of death. So let him come back to you on Monday and heal him. That was the gripe. And Jesus said, well, why should he have to wait?
Mm-hmm.
And the Jewish response would have been, because he's not dying. And so no one can work on the Sabbath unless it is to save someone's life on the Sabbath.
Right.
That was clearly an exception. There's no debate about that. If somebody were dying, and even if the oxen had fallen in, because that was your livelihood, you weren't obligated to let your ox die because it fell into a hole. So you could save even your ox because he was your livelihood. So it wasn't that strict that you'd have to die on the Sabbath. But those were the only exceptions on the Sabbath. Okay? So then the
But
next,
Father Rich, they don't think that way today. Do they still think that way today?
well, there are still rules about work and different levels. Orthodox will have different rules from conservatives, who will have different rules from Reformed. But
Okay.
there's definitely limits on the work one can do on the Sabbath. So, for example, one of the limitations for Orthodox, at least, is that you cannot operate machinery on the Sabbath. So if you go to Sinai Hospital, which is a Jewish hospital, on a Saturday or after sunset on Friday, they have an elevator that opens and closes automatically on every floor. And that way you could go visit someone on the third floor because you would just wait for the elevator to come to your floor, open up, and you would get onto it. And then eventually it'll get to the third floor and you get off. But you don't have to push any button because you don't have to operate the machine. It's operating on its own. It's programmed to stop at every floor and open at every floor. Whereas if you got onto a regular elevator and you pushed the button for the third floor, now you were operating a machine, and that is forbidden on the Sabbath. So if you've ever gone to Sinai Hospital on the Saturday, you'll see it. It opens.
And you know, they have household appliances that have operations for the Sabbath.
Yep, because
you know, like your stove and refrigerator. I don't know what they do, but I noticed them when I was in the market.
Most of the observant, the strictly observant Jews will do all their cooking before sunset on Friday for the weekend.
Right.
So that they don't have to cook on the Sabbath, because even cooking is considered work. So it varies depending on how strict observance that you have. So it's really, in our country, it's the Orthodox who are the strictest observance. So if you go up into Pikesville on Saturday, you'll see a lot of Orthodox Jews walking because they can't drive a car on the Sabbath. So that's why they have to have lots of little synagogues all throughout the area, because they have to have a synagogue that's close enough to walk to.
It's very funny. The Sabbath move. I know why our Sabbath is on a Sunday, but it's very funny how we adopted some of their things, but we don't know why we adopted them.
Well, that's what we're going to do in this session, because that's the next thing. If the Sabbath was on a Saturday, where do Christians get off observing it on a Sunday?
Yes.
Well, we know that.
Well, so that's the next session, the Lord's Day. What did you learn from that?
Well, we learned that the day that Jesus rose from the grave, the resurrection, started the new, that was the new Sabbath for us. It's Sunday. He rose on a Sunday.
Right, but I don't understand that 8th day. As a matter of fact, I don't think I've ever seen 8th day before.
What 8th day?
It is in there. It says 8th day.
If you look at 20.
Calm down, D.
It's there.
Following this habit. Okay. Any other thoughts before we take the dive?
Because it's the first day.
Some dive. I read it, but I tell you, it's some dive.
Okay. Well, as we go through this, let's be very clear.
I understand.
The Sabbath is still
the 7th day.
No, it's still Saturday.
Saturday, 7th day.
So that's going to be important, that there still is an understanding that the Sabbath is Saturday, Sunday is the Lord's Day. Okay? And what the Christians did, we'll go through it, is they shifted the observance from Saturday to Sunday as a way of observing the Lord's Day, not as a way of observing the Sabbath. So we don't actually consider Sunday the Sabbath. We still would say technically Saturday is the Sabbath, Sunday is the Lord's Day. But as Christians, we're kind of taking the obligations of the third commandment and reimposing them on the Lord's Day and not on the Sabbath day.
Okay.
So where does that come from? So yes, the first thing is Jesus rose from the dead on Sunday.
Right.
So what is this 8th day?
Well, yeah, that's what I'm asking.
Well, the 8th day would be, what they did is the next Sunday, right? because the seventh day is the Sabbath, is Saturday. And so the eighth day becomes Sunday.
Why isn't it just the first day?
I don't know why they don't call it. It symbolizes a new creation ushered in by Christ's resurrection.
Well, what does that mean?
Well, that's the new day. The resurrection is,
It's because God rested on the eighth? No.
Nope.
Did
That has nothing to do with resting.
No, it has to do with his resurrection.
Has to do with resurrection, and
Yeah.
there's a connection between the resurrection.
Does it have anything to do with when he was circumcised in the temple on the eighth day?
Nope. It's right there because it is the eighth day following the Sabbath.
Yeah.
It symbolizes the
new creation.
The new covenant that God has with us.
Right. The idea is the first 6 days of the week were the old creation, the original creation. On the resurrection, God engages on a new creation. And that's why it's considered the eighth day and not the first day, because the first day represents the old creation, and the eighth day represents the new creation. So where are the symbols of that? Where, according to the Gospel of John, where was the tomb of Jesus and where was the resurrection? Where was the tomb?
Well, the tomb was in the mountain, the mount.
Nope, not in John's Gospel. The tomb is in a very specific location.
Oh, I don't remember. We went to John's Gospel and I don't remember.
It's in a garden.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so what happened in a garden?
You have
a gardener. The
creation of Adam and Eve.
The Garden of Eden is the first creation. The resurrection takes place in a garden because it is the new creation. Okay, so even the earliest of Christians were making those connections. That the eighth day, the day of the resurrection, is a day of new creation. And that's why John situates the resurrection in a garden, because he's making the connection between the Garden of Eden of the first creation and now the Garden of the resurrection as the new creation. Okay, so the Lord's Sunday became the Lord's Day. Okay, now the question became, how do you observe the Lord's Day and how do you observe the Sabbath? Now, if you read the Acts of the Apostles and you pay close attention, the earliest Christians continued to observe the Sabbath on Saturday. They continued to go to the temple and offer sacrifice on Saturday. And then on Sunday, they celebrated the Lord's Day. And rather than go to the temple on Sunday and offer sacrifice, what did they do on Sunday?
I don't know.
They celebrated the Lord's Supper.
Oh.
So, as a historical fact, we know that the earliest Christians observed both days. They went to temple on the Sabbath, and then they celebrated the Lord's Supper on Sunday.
Okay.
I'm thinking eventually the new Christians stopped the sacrifices though on Saturday, correct?
Okay, so when did the sacrifices in the temple stop?
Maybe when the temple was destroyed again?
Exactly. When the temple was destroyed in the year 70, sacrifice for the Jewish community stopped altogether. They were no longer able to sacrifice on Saturday, which meant that the Christians were no longer able to sacrifice on Saturday. So then there became, after the destruction of the temple, a whole kind of chaotic as the groups try to reorganize themselves and try to re-understand what can they do on what day, right? So the Jews held on to the Sabbath, but that became more of a day of study and of prayer, of worship. They would go to the synagogue instead of the temple because they didn't have a temple anymore. And it was the loss of the temple that began to shift the Christians' interest more on the Lord's Day than on the Sabbath day. But we know as a historical fact that probably up until we have evidence up until I think the 3rd century that Christians were still observing the Sabbath, going to synagogue on the Sabbath, because I forget which saint it is, I think, but one of the saints has to tell them, stop going to the synagogue. We don't do that anymore. Just observe the Lord's Day, the Lord's Supper on the Lord's Day.
Or it was St. Francis.
No, it was St. Francis was until the 13th century.
13th. Okay.
It was well over by then. I think it is up to about the 3rd century that we have evidence, basically on comments like that Christians were still going to the synagogue on Saturday. But we know from the Acts of the Apostles that the earliest Christians did that. They observed the Sabbath on Saturday, and then they celebrated the Lord's Supper on Sunday.
So if they were going to the synagogue for the sacrifices, they were doing these ceremonies with the Jewish people who were not Christian? Were they worshiping,
again,
doing this together?
Just a clarification, so we use our term right. You can only do sacrifice in a temple, not in a synagogue.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Right? The synagogue is a place of study and prayer and worship, that type of thing.
Okay.
And there could be multiple synagogues all over the place. There's only one temple, and the temple was in Jerusalem. So, but yes, they would continue to worship with the Jews. And why? Why would they do that? Because the early Christians considered themselves Jews.
Right. And Christ was a Jew, and he observed those rituals.
And
I'm sorry, you fading. I mean, could you repeat that for me?
The earliest Christians thought of themselves as Jews, not as Christians. And how do we know that? What did they call themselves?
People of the way?
People of the way. So you have to realize in the earliest years of Christianity that the followers of Jesus called themselves the followers of the way. And they consider themselves just one of several sects in Judaism. So in Judaism at the time, there were the Sadducees, there were the Pharisees, there were the Essenes, there were the Zealots, and there were the people of the way. They just saw themselves as Jews. So they didn't have any problem on Saturday observing the Sabbath and on Sunday observing the Lord's Day. Okay? What happened with that? See, you got to know your history.
Did Paul have anything to do with that?
No, Paul did not object to observing the Sabbath.
But the Romans did.
No, Romans didn't have any problem with it.
They didn't?
Nope.
Are you sure about that? Yeah.
Jews had problems with it. All right? At some point, especially after you got rid of the temple and Judaism has to redefine itself, right? Because
Right.
it doesn't have a temple. It began to say, hey, you guys who are followers of the way, and you're talking that you're making claims that Jesus was God, and that means there are more than one God. You
Right.
guys aren't Jews anymore. And so the Jews started to kick the Christians out of the synagogue
Oh.
because they said, you're not Jews. Okay. How'd they get the name Christians?
Right.
After Christ.
Mm,
Then they asked the apostles, where were they first called Christians?
Antioch.
In Antioch. And who gave them the name the Christians?
I don't
What
know.
language is Christian? What language is Christos?
Greek.
Greek.
Say that again.
Greek. Christos is a Greek word. And it was the Greeks who called the followers of Jesus Christians. Not Hebrew speaking Jews or Aramaic speaking Jews. It was Greek speaking people who gave them the name Christian.
Greek or Greeks? The Greeks.
Well, basically what was happening, if again you remember your history, where did Christianity spread most? Among Jews or among Greeks?
Greeks.
Greeks.
Among Greeks. Why is the New Testament written in Greek? Because most Christians spoke Greek. They didn't speak Aramaic or Judaism. In fact, we know that because if you read the Gospels and they quote Jesus speaking Aramaic, what do they do immediately after they use the Aramaic words? They translate it.
Yeah.
So, he takes the deaf man and he puts his fingers in his ears and he said, Ephatha, which means be opened. He's on the cross and he says, Eli, Eli, sabachthani. I can't get it. I have to see it. Which means, my Lord, why have you forsaken me? Okay. So if they have to translate the Aramaic, that's because the people reading it don't understand Aramaic. They were Greek speakers. Christianity spread among the Greeks, among the Gentiles. It was not very popular among the Jews. It did spread in Judaism, but it did not take off like wildfire the way it did among the Greeks. And all of that, the claims that they were starting to make about Jesus, and the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, their association with Greeks, the fact that they would bring Greeks and worship and have a meal with them for the Lord's Day, all of that stuff the Jews found very offensive. And the more the followers of Jesus did all of that, the more the Jews kept saying, you guys are no longer Jewish. Get out of the synagogues. You are not part of our community anymore. So the followers of Jesus lose the temple like everybody else lost the temple, and they starting to get kicked out of the synagogues. So what do you think they did?
Their own worship centers.
Yeah. Where did they worship?
In people's homes.
People's homes. And they simply shifted the Sabbath observance to Sunday now, because in their mind, if you're going to observe the Sabbath, you go to synagogue or the temple, and now they couldn't do either. They couldn't go to the temple because it was destroyed, and they couldn't go to the synagogues because they were kicked out. So they had to shift to Sunday, the Lord's Day. So that's why if you look at paragraph 2175, Sunday is expressly distinguished from the Sabbath, which it follows chronologically every week. For Christians, its ceremonial observance replaces that of the Sabbath.
Hmm.
You understand that?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. And a
Had-
lot of it isn't really
If they
about,
had got kicked out of the synagogue or the temple, it would have still been the same. They wouldn't have had to recreate.
we don't know what would have happened if the followers, that's why I'm not going to use the word Christians, if the followers of Jesus somehow remained within Judaism, it's not clear what would have happened. You know, because just like today, you have your Orthodox, you have your Reformed, you have your Conservative, and then you would have had the Way. You know, let's just use that. Um, and, you know, how would they would have probably still had to observe the Sabbath some way, and they probably would have also observed the Lord's Day. But it's you know, it clearly didn't happen. So it would be pure speculation uh, if the followers of Jesus remained part of the Jewish community.
They made a shift like we're making a shift. And some of the people didn't understand the shift. That's where the argument came in.
Well, a lot of it is the reality in life that theology follows the practice, right? So
Mhm.
so they were forced out on Saturday and they only had Sunday left. And so they changed their theology to conform with their practice.
Question.
Mhm.
Okay.
The what about groups like Seventh-day Adventists who observe the Saturday as Sabbath?
So those are all reforms within Christianity, and they would depart from what the norm had been in Christianity. It's just like, you know, when Luther, uh, you know, changed the whole idea of priesthood, because, you know, he felt that the Catholic Church had gone way overboard and sort of had created its own religion that wasn't rooted in Scripture. And so he took his understanding of Scripture and reinterpreted on what that meant for worship and everything. And that's all the Seventh Day Adventists, the Adventists are doing. They're, you know, the same thing with the Mormons. You know, these are all different takes on Christianity. Same thing with the Jehovah's Witnesses, right? They're reforms of Christianity. Um, all right, so that's how we get from the Saturday to the Sunday. And as you see at the very bottom at 2176, now Sunday worship fulfills the moral command of the Old Covenant. Okay? So that's how we went from Saturday to Sunday. So now what are we required to do on Sunday? So
So
what are
we
we
go to
required?
Mass,
Participate.
we receive Christ and we also with taking the Eucharist, you know, we also are fulfilling a sacrifice.
Okay, yeah,
And
I mean that is actually true. I mean, what Christians did was reinterpret the Lord's Supper into a sacrifice.
But
Um, uh, and there were elements of that from the beginning. Even Paul makes reference to sacrifices around the Lord's Supper.
well, Michael, read that then, starting for 2177.
Go ahead, Michael. You got elected to read that.
Okay. The Sunday celebration of the Lord's Day and his Eucharist is at the heart of the church's life. Sunday is the day on which the Paschal mystery is celebrated in light of the apostolic tradition and is to be observed as the foremost holy day of obligation in the universal church. Also to be observed are the day of the Nativity of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Epiphany, the Ascension of Christ, the Feast of the Body and Blood of Christi, the Feast of Mary, the Mother of God, her Immaculate Conception, her Assumption, the feast of Saint Joseph, the feast of the apostles, Saints Peter and Paul, and the feast of all saints.
All right, what do you get from that?
Holy days of obligation.
Those are all, well, they're all holy days. Not all of them are obligation anymore.
Yeah, because Peter and Paul, those are not holy days of obligation, right?
So in our country, the Epiphany always falls on a Sunday. We just did that so that it, because before the Epiphany really falls on January 6th, correct? Yes. 12 days after Christmas.
Right.
And in some cultures, as you know, in some countries, it remains on January 6th, and it is a holy day of obligation. And it's in many of the cultures, it's also a national holiday. But in this country, the Epiphany is always celebrated as the Sunday after New Year's. Okay. The Ascension of Christ, remember, was always celebrated on Thursday, right?
Right.
Holy Day of Obligation. When is it celebrated now?
The following Sunday, I think.
Following Sunday. And people still don't understand that. All the amount of lectors that have to call me every year that, well, which readings are we doing? Are we doing the Ascension, or are we doing the sixth Sunday of Easter? We're doing the Ascension. Actually, it's the seventh Sunday, I think. We're doing the Ascension because we moved the Ascension from Thursday to Sunday.
Sunday. That's what it's saying here.
The feast of the body and blood of Christ.
Oh, on Sunday.
We always celebrate it on a Sunday, but technically it's supposed to be the Thursday. I think it's maybe the second Thursday after Pentecost. I can't remember exactly what it is, but it's supposed to be a Thursday. But we've moved it to Sunday. The Feast of Mary, the Mother of God. When is that?
That's on a Sunday.
January.
January 1st.
Yeah.
So in our country, when is it a holy day?
Sunday.
This is where you get to the cookie.
It's on a Sunday.
Sunday.
Now, it's a holy day unless it falls on a Saturday or a Monday. I mean, it's always a holy day, but it's not a holy day of obligation if it falls on a Saturday or a Monday.
Why were they changed? Was that for a means for convenience?
People weren't coming to church on these holy days. And the argument was that because they don't come on the Ascension of Christ, they don't understand what the Ascension of Christ is, because they never hear the readings and they never hear priests preaching on it, because they don't come on Ascension Thursday. So if you move it to Sunday, at least more people will be there and they'll learn about the Ascension. Now, why are there some holy days that if it falls on a Saturday and on a Monday, it's not a day of obligation? What do you think the rationale for that is?
I don't know.
Not the Lord's Day.
No, it's because people, if they have to come to church on Sunday, they're not going to come to church on a Saturday or Monday.
And they're not going to come on Monday.
On that same week. So we'll give in. We'll give in to them.
But they used to.
All right, you don't have to come on a Saturday or a Sunday. But if January 1st falls on a Tuesday, it's a holy day of obligation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
But people used to.
Thursday, Friday.
But didn't people used to come on those days? No matter what day y'all had it on, people used to come.
Right. I mean, it's only been in the last 20 years.
Yeah, people used to come and observe those days.
Yeah, it's during my priesthood. But the fact was, most people weren't coming, and that's why they changed the rules.
Yeah.
Now, the Immaculate Conception, when is that?
August 15th.
No.
That's Assumption.
Yep, that's the Assumption. Immaculate Conception is?
Right.
I don't know.
December 8th.
Yeah.
And in this country, that is always a holy day of obligation, regardless of what day of the week it falls on. Okay? Feast of St. Joseph, when is that?
That's in May.
March 19th.
Oh,
And that's culturally in the United States not a very big day, so it's not a holy day of obligation, but it is what we would call a solemnity. I mean, the liturgical celebration is as high and as important as a Sunday. Feast of Apostles.
was it always just one celebration for Saint Joseph?
Well, it's the day, so they would
What?
have you could do a vigil mass, the evening before, or anytime during the day, just like any of
No,
these.
I thought it was one for celebrating him as the husband and one and celebrating him as the worker.
Well,
No,
it's the Feast of Saint Joseph the Worker. That's May 1st, but that's not a solemnity. That's just it does not occupy the same as the Feast of Saint Joseph, which is March 19th.
okay.
It seems to me, I mean, it's a little crazy. Crazy. Because it seems to me, why would United States have one day and Europe have another day? I mean,
What do you think? Why?
I don't
What
know.
was the question, D? I missed your question.
I heard him say somebody said for the United States on some of these holy days, we celebrate it differently than we do, and it means that we celebrate different than we do in Europe. And I just don't know why that is. And he's asking me, and I'm asking him. I don't know why that is.
Because the church gave in to people in the United States. Because of the pressure.
So
That had to do with the schism.
You have to understand the church is not as uniform as Americans think it is. Americans are incredibly self-centered. So
you said a word there, Father.
They think the way we do things is the way the world does things.
Right.
That's not at all the case.
Right.
So in the Catholic Church, basically, national conferences of bishops have a lot of leeway in how they manage the church. So the National Conference of American Bishops, the USCCB, they have certain authority to celebrate things in certain ways, and then other national conferences can choose to do it differently. And that's all it is. It's just the church understands that it's multicultural. It's all over the world. It doesn't want to make everything uniform. It wants to accommodate the different cultures and let the cultures decide how it's going to observe these days. So that's why. So
universal, but not uniform.
They don't all do it the way we do it. Remember, we're talking about, it's always the same. We talk about unity, not uniformity.
Okay, all right.
Okay, so you're not required, everybody's not required to do it the same way, but we have to do it similarly enough that we can see the unity of each other.
Okay.
All right, well, guess what? It's 12:30.
Wow.
So we didn't really get into what are you allowed to do and not allowed to do on a Sunday, but the long and the short of it is the church would say you have to make your own choices now because the law doesn't reinforce the Christian, in this country, the Christian way of doing things. So just because there are stores open on Sunday doesn't mean you should go shopping on Sunday. Okay. But basically, the fundamental observance is that you should at least refrain from doing those things that would keep you from worshiping the Lord. So, what some, Christians or even, clergy would say is, well, you can, as long as you go to church on Sunday, then you can later go shopping on Sunday. Because that shopping isn't preventing you from worshiping the Lord. You're still going to mass and doing both. What happens?
Oh,
What's I can't believe that our Catholic schools are allowed to do it. They hold sporting events at the same time that they're celebrating mass, and they're expecting families to go to mass and later go to the sporting event.
Yep. Father Miller used to fuss about that too.
And that to me is ridiculous. Just don't do sporting events during the time you're celebrating mass. But even Catholic churches and Catholic schools compete over this. But the idea, the way we do it, would say it now, like if you decided to go to the sporting event instead of going to mass, then you have sinned. Okay, you have violated the rule to observe, because you now are replacing something with your worship of God. Okay, at least if you go at a different time, at least if you worship on Sunday or Saturday evening, at least if you worship, you could say you have fulfilled the basic requirement of the third commandment.
Well, most of the church in the county, I know that the masses, they go to mass on Saturday. The mass is really filled up on Saturday than it is on Sunday. So that kids can participate in those sports.
Exactly. So they, under our rules, they have fulfilled the obligation to keep holy the Sabbath day. Because remember, for us, we've reinterpreted that to be from Saturday at 4 o'clock to Sunday at midnight. So as long as you worship somewhere in between there, you're fulfilling your obligation. As long as you go to mass.
This is the other thing. You mentioned that if we have mass on Sunday after 4 o'clock, it moves to Monday, right?
No. We've changed that. We allow you to go all the way to midnight on Sunday.
Oh, okay, because I was thinking, because a lot of the colleges will have mass in the evening on Sunday.
Sunday evening masses are becoming very popular.
Yeah, that's when the college students go to mass.
Young people and young families.
Yeah.
And one of the things I have said is, when this new arrangement gets up and running, the fact that we have 2 priests, if folks want, we may dabble with that. And why have 2 Saturday masses at 4 o'clock like we're going to have? And why don't we get rid of one of the Saturday masses and move that to Sunday evening?
Right.
Yeah. St. Benedict used to have a 6 p.m. mass on Sunday. It was quite convenient when you were doing other things or whatever and couldn't get to church, early Sunday or Saturday.
Mm-hmm.
Well, one of those problems could be that people don't want to be out at night in the fall, in the winter months.
Forgive me, but old people don't want to be out.
Yeah, young people.
Okay?
True.
Young people, they like to be out.
Young people love Sunday evenings. Young people with children. So what they'll say is the advantage of a Sunday evening mass is it gives them the entire weekend to be a family and to do whatever they want to do. They don't have to fight the kids and get them up at 8 o'clock on a Sunday morning. It's a day, all that kind of stuff. So they can do whatever they want all day Saturday and most of the day on Sunday.
Right.
So what they'll do.
So where do they have evening Sunday mass on a Sunday?
Several parishes do it.
In the county mostly.
Offhand.
I'm
downtown they have it.
A lot of the colleges have it, and then that's how people end up going to colleges. So Loyola has a Sunday evening. So, and it's not limited to college students. Anybody can go to the mass.
Oh, yes. Well, that's understandable, but I was thinking more of like a St. Bernardine's or St. Peter Claver's or.
Oh, right. I mean, well,
I think downtown has a mass.
It's not so much.
Downtown has one.
It's not so much the time; it's the neighborhood.
Yes.
When you're
Okay.
talking about Peter Claver and Bernardines, nobody wants to come into this neighborhood in the dark. That's a
Right. That's,
different.
I
That's
guess
a
that's what
different.
I was talking about.
Okay, but it's not that nobody wants to come out when it's dark. They don't want to come into
Yeah.
this neighborhood when it's dark. So that
Yeah.
would be what would operate against us. But you know what they'll say is we'll have the whole weekend, and then 6 o'clock comes or 5 o'clock, whenever, and we bundle the kids up. The whole family goes to church. We come home, we have supper, and then they have to do their homework to get ready for the next day, and we're on our way. So if you think about it from a family cultural point of view, it makes a lot of sense. End your weekend with Mass and use that as the shifting point from we're no longer on vacation. You know, it's no longer a day off. We're shifting now back into a routine where we observe our responsibilities, whether it's getting ready for school or getting ready for work. Okay, so that's why in our culture, Sunday evening is becoming a more popular time for young people. So they want the whole weekend off. So they're not opposed to going to church. They just want to go to church at a different time.
And they want to sleep in on Sunday morning.
Right. I mean, it's just a cultural thing. And legally, under canon law, there's no reason to not to accommodate them. Why do we not do it? Because one, Sunday evening is generally one of the only times I have off. So if I have to say Mass on Sunday evening, I only get then Tuesday off. I don't get any time of rest. Because don't forget, on a weekend I'm also doing funerals, I'm doing weddings, I'm doing baptisms. I won't get a break if I have to work on a Sunday evening as well.
We pay you big bucks for to work.
So what you'll notice is the places that have Sunday masses, Sunday evening masses, have multiple priests.
They do.
They take turns. Because the other thing is, if I'm the only priest and I want off that weekend, I want to go away, good luck trying to find another priest who's going to come in and celebrate Mass at 6 o'clock on a Sunday evening.
And they have the younger priests will do the evening too, to connect with the young people and the families.
Well, that could be if you have that luxury.
Yeah, they'll have a younger priest.
But normally, the places that have Sunday afternoon, evening Mass have multiple priests, and they just take turns. So why don't we end with that, because it's now well past 12:30, and call it a day for the third commandment.